Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play StarTropics 2. In the last part, we started off Chapter 5 after finishing off Chapter 4, and now it's time for us to head on over to this Bob store over here. Since we need to look for a cave here in the west. Welcome to Bob's store. You came for supplies to blast through rock walls, eh? This should get you started. And we've got a load of dynamite. You know, the normal thing you give to a 14-year-old. At most. Actually, I think he's meant to be like 16, 17, somewhere in there. It doesn't really matter. So now comes the part of this stage that's a bit, this chapter that's a little weird. We got the dynamite, we need to start blowing up this rock wall over here to look for mines. There are several you can find, but only two really matter, and one of them is the one between these two very conspicuously placed rocks. You walk up to the wall, the dynamite's placed and it automatically blows up. And in here we can find a big heart. The other caves that you can open, I think there's like 8 total out of the, and counting the 2 that actually matter. They have usually some amount of gold in them, or in one case at least, a giant chicken nugget that looks like gold. If you find one of those, you just need to go back to Bob's store and get more dynamite. No matter what, you have to do that to get 100% anyway. The biggest trial is just finding out where the real cave you need to open is. But, if you remember correctly, there was the saloon last part. The song that particular guy at the piano sang, and forced me to sing unfortunately, and I cannot apologize enough for that, is the hint to find the real entrance to where we need to go in this chapter. The first thing we need to do is find the magic cactus, and if you look through this cactus field, you'll notice every single cactus's arms are facing up, except for this one on my left, which has one facing down. From there, you need to take 2 steps left from facing the cactus, and then 3 steps right from Mike's perspective, so up, and then left all the way towards the wall. That took me longer to find than I'd like to admit on my first playthrough, but here we are. And thus we found the last mine, the dungeon for this chapter. Well, the first one, sort of. Something I've noticed looking back about the early 2/3 of the game is instead of having one longer dungeon, they tend to have 2 shorter ones that have a checkpoint between them. Later chapters tend to go for one larger one that just actually has real checkpoints within it. And I think the main reason they do that is to either give you an actual save point at an earlier point, or a place where your health can get increased, or for you to grab other items. Because you don't get any permanent upgrades for Mike when you're in a dungeon. You only get the temporary items or 1-ups. There's never like any health ups or anything in an actual dungeon. It makes me wonder if it's like an engine side thing that made them decide to do that or something like that. Be careful of the cactus men, by the way. Not only do they sound like a weird joke you'd hear Cave Johnson say in Portal 2, whenever they get defeated, they send out a spread of cactus balls in, I want to say it's either the 4 cardinals or 4 intercardinal directions at random. That, by the way, is the first case of what I brought up you can do last part. There's some walls you can destroy in the game to either find items or progress. Usually, whenever you need to use it to progress, it is more clearly marked, but there are some walls that are not marked whatsoever that usually have like a potion behind them, sometimes extra lives. Not a ton of them, but enough to make it notable. It's the one mechanic in the dungeons I look at and I go, that probably wasn't needed, but it does give the psychic shockwave another purpose in the case you're trying to prefer using the physical weapons. By endgame, I basically only use the psychic shockwave, though. For reasons we'll get into later. Also, this is the point in the game where they really start to use invisible pits like that to have level design work around them, either to make several floors that eventually loop into each other, or to just be a way forward. And at times it's a little awkward because you can't exactly tell they're gonna be there. Usually they try to mark them either by putting some actual pits around them like that, or putting some panels around them, but given how the early game works with, especially panel placement, it can be a little awkward because you just don't know if it's gonna be an actual pit or ground you can stand on. I'm not the biggest fan of that. But time for something I am a fan of. We got some mimics in here. You want to use your psychic shockwave on them because when you fight them with this, they just hop around firing a couple of coins at every now and then that are very easy to dodge. If you fight them with your physical attacks, though, they all at once turn into coins and just start moving around rapidly and very unpredictably. They are a lot easier to take out with the Psychic Shockwave, and that's why I like that the 2 weapon types actually matter in this game, because when they do stuff like that with enemies, it's interesting. Hold on to those bolas for the boss fight coming up, by the way, because they're the best way to do damage against it. By the way, you don't need to fight these cactuses. I believe they just eventually spawn an item if you do so, or at least a door that leads to an item. Alright, yeah, there we are. I think it's another potion? Yes, it is. But now we're on to one of my least favorite bosses in the game. In fact, not for nothing, while I like Chapter 5 a lot as an actual chapter, I'd say it has 2 of the hardest boss fights in the game. Coming up here, we got a Cyclops. The Cyclops is gonna play a little bit of basketball with a boulder when it tries to move closer to you, and it can use that boulder to block your own attacks, which you can hit it either in the eye or in the legs. But you're gonna want to stay a distance away from it at all times, because touching the Cyclops, if it's not an instant kill, it might as well be with the amount of damage it can do. Keep your distance, and try to pace your shots in such a way that you're not constantly throwing them into the boulders that it's holding up. Otherwise, that fight can get real tense towards the end, especially if you're, like, backed into the wall. That's the first dungeon of this chapter, though. It's not too bad until the boss is a bit of a difficulty spike, and that's more or less the same thing that's about to happen in the second dungeon. But first, Donkey.
Welcome, Mike. I am glad that you have come so far. Listen well, I'll give you added strength so that you may overcome dangers ahead.
And now our Psychic Shockwave's been upgraded to the Super Psychic Shockwave.
Remember, Mike, my powerful magic will guide you on your journey.
Now, you might remember earlier in the LP I said there is one weapon that still kind of works like the weapons in the original StarTropics, where the amount of strength it has is dependent on the amount of health you have total. The Psychic Shockwave is that weapon overall. If you go below a certain health threshold, it reverts back to the normal Psychic Shockwave, but if you go back over that threshold, it returns back to the Super Psychic Shockwave. I want to say the health threshold for this is about 6 or 7 hearts, so even now with our current health, that's like half our health, so you have a decent amount of breathing room. But it's around now where taking hits becomes a lot more costly just because of this, because the Super Psychic Shockwave is a much stronger weapon. If memory serves, per hit, it does less damage than the dagger does, but it has such a higher rate of fire, partnered with the relatively low invincibility frames of enemies in the game, that it's just the better option until we get the next physical weapon. And this is what I meant by get used to hearing the Psychic Shockwave's throwing sound effect, because you're gonna hear it relentlessly moving forward in the game. It's that good of a weapon, and I stick with it for that long. Now, if you didn't get off that conveyor belt in the previous screen, I believe, you end up falling down in that center area to a room below that one, that you just end up coming up through a staircase to that one. The main reason you want to jump off to the left and kill the enemies in that room is to come over here to get this magic potion. And you want to do that because I'd say the hardest boss in the game is at the end of this dungeon. If it's not this one, it's one from 2 chapters from now-ish. I find this one to technically be harder as there's just so much going on in it. But the attack pattern of one of the other ones is technically more complicated. Also, it's around now where playing the game can get a little scary. I forget if it's going into this chapter or going into the next one where it can start happening. But the game has a couple of anti-modification methods in place to prevent things like Game Genius from being used or to prevent piracy. And one of them is pretty devastating, almost on the level of the Earthbound one, where if it detects you're hacking, it'll do stuff like increase enemy spawn rates and crash right at the end of the game. In this game's case, what it'll do is it'll check about 16 different memory chunks in the game. And if it fails to return those checks as authentic in some way, it sends you back to Chapter 2. You know, where the game really started and wasn't just cutscenes. That'll happen. It does that check at the end of every chapter going into the next one. So there's just a roughly 1 in 16 chance-ish that you'll go back to the start of the game. I think I have the math right on that. It's real rough. I've never personally had it happen, as at the end of the day, a 1 in 16 chance isn't exactly common, but it's definitely harsh if you have it happen to you. I think there's plenty of people who've had that happen on completely legitimate hardware with no actual sketchiness, quote-unquote, happening. So, be careful and pray. I'm not one to pray, but pray. Also, this dungeon actually has a mini-boss with that weird minecart skeleton. That fight's not too bad, despite the fact it constantly throws out projectiles as well as ads for you to take out. But if you're not careful, it's very easy to take a lot of damage there, as you saw. This is why I'm glad they give you as many potions in this dungeon as they do. But now we're technically in the haunted mine section of the dungeon, where we start having whiz robes that are miners. Kinda grim, but at least it's realistic because, man, a lot of people died during the gold rush out in the west. This here's another room you can use the psychic shockwave to blow up a wall. At least in some cases as well, where there's actually walls you can take out. The actual sprite that indicates the wall can be taken out loads in with everything else so you can see that something's different, but sometimes it's a little awkward. Now, in this dungeon so far, we picked up 2 stars. Those are notably different stars than the ones enemies can drop. Whereas those ones can be compiled to give you a heart. The stars we've gotten here are basically Starmen from Mario. They are complete invincibility for periods of time. And that's going to be really handy against the boss fight, which is why I haven't used them yet. Be careful of these wooden stakes, by the way, because every single part of their sprite is damaged, compared to some games where it's just the tip. Alright, boss of this dungeon is the Ghost Miner. This boss is a bit complicated in that it has a main attack that causes 4 rocks to shoot down. It paralyzes you for a second when it does that. The actual sprite itself hurts, but so does the spread of rocks it shoots outwards. And while the rocks are moving all over the place, its main attack is to just walk all over the place. It tends to stick towards the top, but occasionally it'll do jumps downward to try and home in on you. And when it does that is where things can get really complicated. Using the invincibility items makes this boss fight a non-issue, but if you're not using those, it's a nightmare. But that's the dungeon for this chapter. The actual dungeon part's pretty straightforward. Just watch out for either of those boss fights because they can be trouble. And thus, time for the legendary line piece. My favorite. 4 down, and there can't be too many. We're running out of room down there on the UI. And more health increase. And all we can tell, just based off the amount of hearts we have, we're about 3/4 of the way done. But now we're on to the next chapter. If there is something I do miss from StarTropics 1, it's that there was usually an actual through line of how you got from one chapter to the next, either by riding a dolphin, using a submarine, finding the invisible thing, things like that. In this game, once you get the tetrads, Mike's usually just like, I guess I'm done here, and goes. I do wish there was maybe like one more cutscene with the NPCs from the chapter, if there are any key ones, like Cleopatra back in chapter 3. But oh well. Welcome to chapter 6. This one can be a bit of a pain. Huh? Where am I? We decide to look around. I love the theme in this town. It's so weirdly jaunty to me. You're just a visitor to Italy, yeah? Have a nice time, ciao! Oh gee, I wonder where we are. Subtle game. Tetrad, I have no tetrad. How about some nice tetrazini or tortellini? Taste of that dated Italian stereotype. Hey kid, need a map to the artist's home? What do you say? I got Raphael, Donatello, Michelangelo, Leonardo. Sorry, I'm out. So the last one's some big weird guy. I mean, I'll take the Donnies. He usually has more toys available because people don't usually like him as much, but he's always been my favorite, just about. Bar maybe Raph in 2003. You look familiar. You ever eat at Caesar's Hut Pizza? I'm the pizza man. That's a fun little callback to chapter 3. Bit weird that place is still in business given the time distance from where we were in chapter 3 to where we are now, but we'll talk about that more in a few moments. Because where we need to go is the house that's currently on the very bottom of the screen. By the way, I think this pasta can heal you if you somehow are damaged at this point. Welcome to the studio. Yeah, well, I recognize those footprints. I guess there were 2 other Zodas.
I can't move.
Someone's inside the statue. I'm sure that's nothing. But welcome to easily one of the deadliest dungeons in the game. This is a complete obstacle run that is very easy to take damage in. There's health littered all over the place because of this. And I want to say there's even a glitch in like this room specifically where if you attack with your physical weapons, the sprite that loads in is wrong. It's the next physical weapon for some reason. We even have new hazards like chains we have to jump over. And when you do this, by the way, make sure you're holding the direction you're jumping because when you're on moving platforms, your momentum does not carry. So you do need to actively hold right to jump over them. Reminds me of my days playing Sonic 4. Oh god, I still have to do that for the channel. Oh god, oh no. It's not that bad. But going back to it's gonna be kind of bad. Now, you don't need to go for items like the potions in here whatsoever, because there's not even a boss at the end of this mini dungeon. You're mostly gonna want it in case you just take too many dumb hits doing anything else in this, because it is very easy to take pretty quick hits. But we're coming up on where taking hits is very easy to do right now, because we're coming up on the sort of puzzle for the area. You guys like playing golf? How about with giant iron death orbs? The thing is about these things is whenever you hit them, they swap whether or not they're moving vertically or horizontally, and usually if you're near a wall, directly into you. You need to place yourself in such a way that hitting them makes them fall into the hole. And there is a little bit of a delay on you hitting them and them swapping, like if they're in the middle of moving between direct tiles, they wait until the next tile to do so. The first room isn't so bad, but then this room happens. I have died here more times than I'd like to admit, and I want to say the pit itself might be instant kill, but don't quote me on that. This is annoying, and also weirdly reminds me of, I forget if it was a puzzle in Oracle of Ages or Seasons. I want to say it may have been Ages because puzzle would be more of that game's thing to begin with, but it could very well just be the weird magnet glove from Seasons. I haven't played those in like 2 years, because my usual summertime Zelda playthrough. Taking your time and using the blocks in this room to your advantage is, I'd say, the way to go, because you can just easily stay up here where it's safe on the other side of the pit. But this room just sucks. Trying to stay far away is also just a better idea because the Psychic Shockwave has more range than any of the physical weapons do, even at this point. So using that to give yourself a delay on when you can jump over or away from the balls helps a lot, but be careful. Once you finish this, though, you're done with this dungeon. I guess this is the closest thing to a boss fight this place has. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 5, we're gonna finish off this chapter, I would hope, and then move on to the next one. See you guys then.